Hey, welcome to the show. It's funny, I wasn't actually going to make a video today because I'm really kind of tired from something, but I basically get nudged by whomever, angels or guides or whatever, to make videos at specific times, and it's kind of like, do it now, which is one of the reasons I think I started that audio podcast, is that there's times where I'm basically really pushed to talk about something, and I'm like, this is not a convenient video time, and it's like, don't worry about it, find another way, just record the audio. So I would like to thank those of you who leave me questions and ideas for future videos and suggestions in the comments. So please do that, because it often inspires me, because sometimes I think the angels and guides work through you to leave those comments, and it's kind of my to-do list for future things. So this video today just came from a recent comment. It's a topic I've thought about at length, at times, discussed with others. And one of the books that I'm reading on a daily basis, you're not going to be able to see it probably with this background thing I have here, and it's also mirrored. Anyway, it's called Channeling Archangel Michael, The 7 Signs of Humanity's Ascension. This is a book published by Daniel Scranton, who I've, years ago, back when I was still up in ETHgate, took one of his classes on kind of abundance mindset or raising your vibration, that kind of a thing, and did Zoom calls with him. And he channels a lot of galactic beings, including archangels. And I randomly, of course, got an email. I've been on his list for a long time, but I don't read the emails a lot because he sends them out a lot. And I just read them one day, and this was after something with Archangel Michael. And it turned out that he had a whole book of just channelings from Michael that basically was guided to me to buy this book. And it's wonderful. It's on Amazon. You can get it wherever you want. Each sort of lesson is one page, and many of the lessons cover a perspective on how to look at things like we're going to talk about today. So this is my long-winded way of saying that I'm going to credit a bunch of the ideas in this to this book. So if this is of interest to you as a topic, Daniel Scranton's books are on Amazon, and this one is his Archangel Michael channels. And they kind of come through as a little lesson of the day. I mean, they would make a perfect email sequence if you wanted inspirational words of the day. The way they suggest reading this book is you kind of read through it once. I'm still actually going through it for the first time because I'm not in any kind of a rush. And then once you've read it all once, if you need guidance or would like guidance from Michael, you can ask him for that. And then you kind of randomly flip to a page. And the idea is that the lesson he wants to share with you will be on that page. People do this same method with the Bible a lot. All right, so the topic for today is justice, forgiveness, and the law of grace, and karmic debts, karma. One of the things that you learn about when you kind of get into the energetics and sort of the rules of this game and why did we choose to incarnate in this world and free will, I've come to learn that a lot of it has to do with the choices that we make and whether those choices are beneficial to you or to others, which generally raises your vibration. Those are things that are kind of considered additive to the energetic score. Or there are things that take away from the energetic score, and those are harmful to yourself or harmful to others. And if you do more harm than you do good, you kind of have a debt at a balance sheet level, and that will determine whether your vibration is overall increasing or decreasing. But then you get into specific things like, well, what happens if you did a bad thing, like you hurt someone, and you have thought a lot about this thing that you did, and you are apologetic and genuinely remorseful, do you always have to pay that karmic debt? And this is where the idea of law of grace comes in, and that the answer is no. Karmic debts can be cleared by the grace of God when you seek forgiveness and you seek to kind of wipe the slate clean. And this is particularly relevant, in my opinion, when you also have generational karmic debts. And this is something that comes up in the stuff that I'm studying about Africa. There's a lot of stuff that happened in Africa a long time ago that the people alive today are still living out the energetics of that. Congo's a good example. Back when Leopold II just decided the Congo was his, and all of a sudden one day everyone and everything in the giant country of the Congo now belonged to him personally, that created a whole lot of harm. And he had people who worked for him, and then there was middlemen who were involved and kind of sucked into this craziness. And it created a whole lot of problems that are still, like, consequences of those are still playing out today. So when you think about, like, how does one solve that problem, even just talking about it like just as a philosophical, hypothetical topic, you know, you got all these people who are mad about stuff that happened a long time ago. Like, how do you settle the score on that? And are you really responsible for the sins of your ancestors or the debts that your ancestors accrued at an energetic level? And if so, like, do you have to pay them off the hard way, or are there other options? And this is where this idea of law of grace comes in, and that, yes, those debts can be clean. You know, this world is generally benevolent, and it wants to encourage all of us to embody higher vibrational values. And one of the most high vibrational values around is forgiveness. And so if I can find it in myself to forgive either someone else or myself for something that in someone's eyes is unforgivable, like, that's an act of courage, and that's an act of grace and an act of almost generosity to put aside your own personal ego slightingness or whatever to forgive someone else. Like, it's often when you truly forgive someone who has genuinely harmed you, to actually do that is a very difficult and courageous and sometimes honorable thing to do, because the ego loves grudges. It just wants to hold on. It wants to see an eye for an eye in pain. It wants to, the ego wants everything that was done to them to be done back. The problem with this concept of, like, an eye for an eye is it creates a pendulum where, and I'll probably make a whole video on this, because this, for some reason, I'm becoming very knowledgeable about South Africa as well. And you have a situation there where, you know, 50 years ago, you had this small group of people, like, implementing these very oppressive, dehumanizing policies as a control mechanism. There was no loving, benevolent leadership back in, like, that time of South Africa for everyone. And it was, you know, if you look at the history of it, when Cecil Rhodes, like, put a lot of those policies in place originally, it was because he was scared, and they were just trying to keep it together. So they started with these policies. I doubt anyone back in the, like, late 1800s in South Africa had any idea what would happen 100 years later. Maybe they did. But so the things kind of got out of hand. So anyway, it ended up with this group of people who were not loving leaders doing things for the best of all citizens, right? I mean, apartheid South Africa was a very difficult place to live, especially if you were Black. But now, so when that situation came to a head, there was an opportunity to, like, wipe the slate clean and kind of start over where everyone is treated equally and fairly. But now the pendulum's swinging the other way, and you have this, like, Julius Malema and the ANC and these sort of spin-offs. They love the acronyms. We've got this Democratic Alliance DA and this EFF, Economic Freedom Fighters. I'm going to probably mess up these acronyms. But you have these kind of, like, newer, quote, liberal / practically communist type grassroots organizations coming up, but they're embodying a lot of the same energy that the apartheid leaders have. Like, they want all this land forcibly taken from sort of the white farming community. I mean, I'm not saying all, I don't want to overgeneralize it. Everyone in South Africa feels this way. This is the message coming from these political narratives, that there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of, like, killing of the Boers, killing white people, killing the farmers, this anger about retribution and vengeance and wanting to take back what was taken from them a long time ago. The problem is that at an energetic level, this is really just the pendulum has swung the other way, and you have taken this very undesirable leadership quality from one group and you have just implanted it in another. And if that group is now allowed to succeed and implement their policies, which will benefit themselves at the expense of many citizens and even very harmful to some citizens, then it's just going to be like lather, rinse, repeat. And then the thing will spin back the other way. You're just going to keep going. As long as vengeance is the game, where everybody who gets hurt back. You just create this pendulum. It just keeps swinging. And the way out, it's war games. The only winning move sometimes is not to play, and for everyone to step off this pendulum and say, we're just going to keep hurting each other back and forth until someone steps in and say, you know what? This is going to be incredibly difficult, but there's going to have to be a mass forgiveness where things that were done that were genuinely harmful are going to be forgiven, and we're going to have a blank slate, a blank game board, and decide how can we set up this country in a way that everyone wins. And to do that from a genuine, benevolent place would be amazing. The problem is that a lot of people who are attracted to that kind of role can get bought off and be corrupted, or the real good ones, they just get killed by like cabal, right? Patrice Lumbumba was a leader in the Congo in the 1960s who, from my research and reading, was actually a really good guy who wanted to have the Congolese people thrive and succeed in life after the Belgians kind of, quote, gave up their colonization, surrendered the colony, liberated the colony. I don't really know how liberated it really was, but that was the appearance of it. And so he's a good guy, gives a lot of hope to the people that maybe they're going to have a shot at some more sovereignty and some more independence than they had when they were assets of the country of Belgium. But the CIA and the Belgians killed him, right? He wasn't going to be bought offable. He wasn't able to be compromised. They couldn't bribe him. And a lot of the stuff in the Congo back then in the 1960s was about uranium. Like they wanted this Shinkolobe mine down in sort of southeast Congo. And Congo's huge. So a lot of the U.S. interests there back then was about this Cold War, Russia, nuclear arms race thing. And there's a lot of uranium in the Congo. And they wanted a leader there who would allow the U.S. to get access to this and not to the Russians. And because of that, like very specific and very political agenda, like they kill the one good guy, who's in a position to lead the Congolese and end up with a series of dictators who, many of whom are totally compromised and corruptible, but they were installed and they were allowed to succeed because they played the game that the sort of cabal wanted in terms of resources and minerals and uranium and all that stuff. So back to this topic of like, as long as this fighting goes back and forth and I was saying that it's hard to find these genuinely good leaders who are not compromised and actually want the betterment of the people and aren't just pursuing power. I think people pursue power for money, but there's also something more intoxicating, I think, to certain types of people who want to be in positions of authority, that they feel like they've got all these people under them and that they're powerful and important. And I think that drug is even more addictive than money itself, but they end up going hand in hand. I mean, if you're the leader of a country and you take foreign aid given to you and you go out and you buy stuff for yourself, I mean, you're not doing the right thing. So there's some kind of nefarious agenda there that type of stuff has to go. And back to this idea of vengeance and retribution, you have places where all of these corrupt leaders were in place and they just allowed all this chaos to ensue, and they kept places, many of them in Africa, in a state of almost perpetual war so that things couldn't get overseen by benevolent leaders. So there's been a lot of taking of resources, gold, diamonds, cobalt, lithium, all that type of stuff. It's not that hard to get those mining contracts in corrupt countries if you have money to pay it off. Like it makes a lot of the red tape go away, where if you had truly benevolent leaders who were mindful of the fact that a lot of these mining operations are very harmful to the land and that they're not benefiting the people, a truly benevolent leadership would have a process in place that doesn't just give the contract to the highest bidder. Maybe it gives the contract to the most ethical and honorable bidder, which I don't think is really happening. Now the Chinese are managing a lot of the mining stuff in the Congo, and they've been making a lot of promises they have not kept, according to my research. So it just seems like the same problem keeps playing out over and over, where you have these mining contracts being awarded. It's not even really clear if the government's actually authorized to give those, because who really owns the land in the Congo? It's not. I have a lot of questions about former colonies and whether or not the owners of the corporations that were those colonies, whether they actually ceded the property rights at all. It's a good question. One of my favorites to talk about with people who are knowledgeable in this area. And no one really knows for sure, because these documents are not available for us to find at this time. But back to this idea. So you've had all this fighting in these places, right? There's been constant war, hurting from generation to generation. How do you resolve these things in a world where you have an eye for an eye and you have to have justice? And if you do something bad, then you have to pay for it. And if you're not able to pay for it, your children, your descendants are going to pay for it. It just creates these endless loops where you're expecting everyone to be perfect in order to get out of these debts. And I just don't think that's the way, because that's not the best lesson to learn. Like, one of the best lessons to learn ties into forgiveness, and that you can do a wrong thing and know that it was a wrong thing and kind of wish you hadn't done it. But when you are truly apologetic and you go back to mend a relationship, for example, by asking for forgiveness, that's harder than taking the karmic debt and having to play out a crappy situation again as sort of your penance. So there's a bunch of ways in my long-winded explanation here about how some of these infractions and crimes can be how they can be resolved. I think justice and vengeance isn't the only way, because it creates these endless loops. You often hear stories about how people who go to prison and get out of prison, they're now labeled as a felon, right? It's really hard to get a job. You're kind of seen as this degenerate in society. And if you can't really get a job, but you need to eat and you need a place to live, like, what are you going to do? You end up having to commit crimes as a way to make money. And now you're stuck in this loop of being a criminal, because even though you've paid your sentence, you're not really forgiven by society, because you're given this label of like being dangerous and scary and this felon that nobody wants you around. And so the loop just keeps playing out. And then if you had kids, and now the kids are the children of a felon, they now have this sort of, quote, scarlet letter on them, and they're going to be more likely to be steered into a life of crime as well, because they've been labeled as the kid of criminals. So maybe their job prospects are going to be limited if this became widely known. So I'm steering further and further away from this very firm, like, rigid set of rules where, like, if you commit the crime, it doesn't even have to be like a legal crime. It's just more of a crime where you hurt someone else. So energetically, if you are mean to someone, that's considered, quote, a crime in the laws of karma, because you're harming someone. And then in the laws of karma, you will now face an equal and opposite reaction. You would have to incur that debt. Do you have to pay off every debt, or can you call on the law of grace and ask God for forgiveness? Yes, you can. What I found out that, ironically, it's very easy for God to forgive you. What is dramatically harder is to forgive yourself. And so if you have done something that you know was wrong and harmed someone, can you truly and genuinely forgive yourself without forcing yourself to pay this penance and make yourself suffer in part of this, like, retribution? It's not easy. And then there's this idea of, like, if you just forgive yourself too easily, like, have you even really, like, are you even paying for that crime at an energetic level? It's a great question. I think what people underestimate is how difficult it is to genuinely forgive yourself. And if you have a sort of deep, compassionate, empathetic soul, like, if you've hurt someone and you know that, and you feel badly about that because you didn't want to hurt them, but maybe you were scared, or you were mad, or you're just caught up in something, or even in some cases, I think demonic energy comes and works through people. And if you're in a bad mood and you're tapped into a low vibration energetic level, demons can get you to say shit that you wouldn't otherwise say and do things that you wouldn't otherwise do. And if you're under the influence, like if you've been drinking a bunch and you do something that's out of character, sometimes that is demonic energy playing around and getting you to do stuff because they like that whole fear energy stuff. And so if you're in that position where you've done something that's genuinely harmed someone and you feel badly about it, just try forgiving yourself. Like, it's not that easy. Like, asking someone else's forgiveness is way easier in many cases than forgiving yourself. So that, to me, is where the opportunity comes, is for us to look at ourselves and focus more on owning our own things and forgiving ourselves and saying, you know what, I forgive myself, but I will never do that again. And I'm actually going to try to contribute more as a result, just because that's how I want to live and the kind of person that I want to be. So the original comment on this came up about, I'm in the XRP world, and we covered this topic of ETHgate, ad nauseum. And there were some people like the Jay Claytons and the Bill Hinmans of the world who, committed harm against the whole collective of the XRP army, people who were holding back then. Oddly, didn't even know what XRP was back then, so I wasn't harmed as part of the the Ethereum Free Pass speech and the situation where some members of the U.S. government, the members of the SEC, kind of colluded with JP Morgan, the banking cartel, to give Ethereum this blessing of being a commodity, aka not a security, so that it could experience a whole bunch of like money-making activity, while XRP was suppressed because it had this label of being an unregistered security, which made a lot of people scared to participate in that ecosystem. So the kind of catalysts for that particular season were these two SEC guys, and there's a lot, and kind of Gary Gensler gets brought into it as well, as sort of the bad, evil SEC who conspired to harm the XRP people and in the Ethereum ecosystem prospered during that time. So now that case is over and it's settled, it's now a chapter behind us, the question comes up is like, do we need to see those guys pay? Like, do we need to have justice? And some people feel yes, that like they were harmful, they lied, they had an agenda that was not in alignment with their promise in that job position. Like, they were supposed to protect retail investors, and instead they did something that directly harmed them and were dishonest about it. That would incur a karmic debt on their part. I'm actually quite confident that the universe will work things out for them in other ways. We often have a very limited view about justice, and it has to go through the legal system, and you have to be accused of a crime and potentially go to jail or pay a fine and have this be done in the public eye. I think that is one way people pay for crimes. But if you truly understand and believe in the laws of karma, that like what you put out, you get back. I mean, I have seen this in my own life over and over and over. I don't doubt that is true. And I don't think that someone like Bill Hinman or Jay Clayton are going to be able to put out that energy of deception and manipulation and not incur that backlash in some way. It just might not be obvious to us. Both of them or one of them may have been scammed in their life or harmed or taken advantage of or lied to or something else that wasn't necessarily in the public eye. But I'm pretty sure that they've paid that debt in another way. There's no free lunch with that type of harm unless they got on their knees and asked for forgiveness and forgave themselves and went through this process seeking the law of grace. They may have. I don't know, or I don't think so though. But partly it also raises a question of what does that really do for us now? Like, we're again going to if we are focused on retribution and vengeance, then we're sitting there in this low vibration energy, mad, seeking answers or solutions to things that already happened. Now, I understand that there's some people who might want to have damages for that. And again, I've talked to Jimmy, my business partner, about this at length because he has considered, as a lawyer, like taking that on or pursuing that in some way. And we've talked about it a lot. Like, is it worth it to be obsessing and doing all this work on something that is in the past? Yes, there could be a financial component to it, but maybe not. We don't know that. And if we took all of that same effort and energy and put it into something more constructive than like a damages lawsuit, like, would that just be more beneficial for everyone in the long run? Like, if we were going to make, let's just say millions of dollars on this lawsuit, is there other ways that we could bring in millions of dollars that are not requiring us to like seek vengeance and be in this low vibration eye for an eye energy? Because what I also learned through the XRP stuff that I was involved in, this valuation paper that we wrote a couple of years ago, is that it's a very like fiery world. And when you are taking very bold stances on things in that world, you're going to take a lot of heat for it. And you can become conditioned and let those accusations and negative energy roll off of you. But it's still like, you're like hanging out in this dirty bathwater. Like it's just not the place that will make you feel good, in my opinion. This was just the choice that we made. Well, I don't really want to be a part of any lawsuit about ETHgate, because I would rather take that energy and focus on something more constructive. And that means letting go of this need for vengeance and saying, you know what? I'm going to trust that karma will resolve whatever issues those people involved personally took on, and ask God or your angel guides, like, what's in my story that this ETHgate stuff awakened, that I can use this as like a positive, moving forward, looking ahead type of a thing. Now, this gets complicated in some of these more, these war-torn areas where there's been a lot of fighting and a lot of vengeance, and it goes beyond just simply, I want some money back for an investment that didn't yield what I wanted it to yield at the time. There's certainly a lot more harm in other places, and this concept of like justice and even get into the issue of the cabal and the, Illuminati, whatever, people who've been lying to us. And, I know people think there have been military tribunals and that people have been put to death. Like, I don't know that to be true. I find it fascinating that some people are so certain of it because someone else told them, and I'm not. So I don't know what happened. And I don't know if there'll ever be these arrests of these shady people. And the question that comes up when I kind of meditate on this is like, what will those arrests do for you in your life? So, if Fauci was sent to jail for all of his shady stuff, does that change anything for what you're going to do today and the timeline that you're going to experience? The answer is really no. It's just my ego kind of wanting this like punishment in this retribution. And one of the cool things about this Angel Michael book is that it really looks at life, not so much that we are in this game where we're trying to figure it out, as much as we all chose to incarnate on Earth to experience certain things. And we wanted to experience the full array of emotions. So imagine an ice cream store, it's got 31 flavors, and you're like, you know what? I'm literally going to try all 31 of these flavors. I want to know what each of them tastes like. So imagine every possible human emotion, from grief to rage to jealousy to love to gratitude to compassion, like every single one of them. And we all signed up to experience all of those. In order to experience the emotion, you need like a story. Like, you got to have a script and a plot, and you need characters to play those roles in the movie. So what has been fun is I've gone back and looked at sort of the ETHgate thing and seen all of the good things that have come out of that from that season. I met a whole bunch of people. We figured out this kind of conspiracy with the government and kind of came together saying we're no longer going to allow the government to manipulate us and lie to us. And this XRP army movement was incredible to be a part of, because people really stood together and were excited to stand up for ourselves and no longer allow this manipulation to go on unchecked. Made a lot of new friends, learned a lot about the money system and what the changes are coming. And for many of us, ETHgate was kind of the catalyst to make the XRP story even more interesting than it was. Because I didn't come from a world of banking and finance, and I wasn't like a techno crypto person. Like I didn't care about any of that stuff. The thing that got me most interested in XRP was ETHgate, because I was fascinated with this scandal and why have all these banks and people gone to great lengths to rig this system? Like what's really behind it? And it opened up this big world to me. So if ETHgate had never happened and Jay Clayton had never filed that lawsuit, and Ripple had been gone on at that time back in 2020 to build the ecosystem that they're building now, my life would be completely different, right? And so a lot of the good things that came out of that lawsuit, I'm grateful for. And so I kind of needed that storyline, that plot line to play out for all these things to come together and to meet all these people and have these experiences. And I'm going to Vegas in a couple of weeks for XRP Las Vegas, number 3. I would never have been a part of any of that if this ETHgate stuff had never happened. And so in order for it to happen, you needed bad guys in the roles. You needed, your Jay Claytons and your Hinmans and your Gary Genslers to play these parts in the movie, and even the cabal and the Illuminati. So, if you're someone in South Africa on your own journey, like if the worst of the worst in terms of apartheid leaders had never been in those roles, like your story would have been different, and the moves you're going to make to kind of overcome a lot of that adversity wouldn't have been possible. So learning to see that all the bad guys in the world are characters in the movie, and like the movie would have been really boring if everyone was really nice and sweet and kind. I mean, you wouldn't go and see that movie. You wouldn't want to experience it. And most importantly, the 31 flavors of ice cream that you wanted to taste, all of them, you can only taste one kind of ice cream if everybody is sweet and kind and kind of living this blissfully easy life. And no one would have any emotional depth, and no one would have any kind of strength. One of the strange obsessions I had in the last couple of years is the story of Osiris and Isis and Horus, and this kind of Egyptian mythology from way back in the day. And one of the things it's a very tragic story where Osiris is brutally killed more than twice by his brother out of jealousy. And his wife, Isis, tries to put him back together and save him. And she's sort of like a high priestess magician type. And she tries to put him together and fix him, but it's not enough. She's not strong enough, powerful enough. And I've often wondered, like, why was this goddess who seemed to have all of these magical tools at her disposal, why did she walk away and feel like she wasn't good enough and enough to save her husband and put him back together? And the answer that I have learned is that, well, she was living too sheltered of a life where she only had experienced these limited set of very high vibrational love energies. And when something scary happened, she didn't have any dark energy to combat the other dark energy. So she didn't have, those stories where like a mom will lift a car off of the child, like defines this inner strength. That's kind of almost a like Hulk type strength. Like if you remember the show, The Hulk, I guess the movies have it too, but the good shit was the show from the 80s with David Banner. Every week he would wander into some new place trying to hide behind, stay out of sight and just make some money. And something would piss him off and he would, turn into this Hulk, and he would find this inner strength that like he didn't have most of the time when he was a mere mortal. And so you hear stories about, I just used the one of the mom pulling the car off of her kid. Like normally she would not have the physical strength to lift this car. It would be completely unimaginable. But, in this moment of like sort of protective passion, she channels this strength to lift up the car. And to have that, I feel like you have to have experienced rage and anger and resentment and fear, because that can be a source of strength that when you are an alchemist of energy, you can pull on that. And this is why sometimes when people are in difficult situations, to be nice and sweet isn't always the way. Sometimes with a dark energy, you have to match it and, hold your ground and stare back and not just cower. Where if you only lived this very peaceful, blissful life and you'd never experienced any of these darker, denser emotions, you wouldn't be able to operate at your full potential. In order to be the best version of you. You can't just be all love and light and sweet. You have to have experienced some of these dark things, but kind of brought them into yourself and see them for the good that they can provide you, which sometimes could be a protective energy or sometimes a destructive energy where things need to get, sometimes you have to have difficult conversations in order to clear the air on something. And those can sometimes feel like an argument, but really it's just expressing some of these bottled up energy, these bottled up emotions that you have, in a situation, and let it all out. So I don't really know where I was going with this. Sorry. I think the point is that we go through these experiences on Earth. We chose to have all of them. We need to have, quote, bad guys in the movie to get these emotions to be, felt. And part of understanding that and appreciating it is being able to see all of the characters in the movie as necessary for your own soul's learning and not necessarily need to seek vengeance for them. Like if you were to wake up tomorrow and kind of rise above the game and see your soul family and be like, oh, wait, you were playing that guy. Oh, wait, you were playing that guy. You would realize we're all just playing these characters in the movie, and you wouldn't you're not going to be mad at someone for the character that they played. You'd be like, great job. You were very convincing. I totally believe you hated me. You would commend them on a job well acted. This, to me, I feel like is a way to get over a lot of the anger about things that were done to wrong us. You can sit around pissed. This is the red pill trap I talked about in the other video. You can sit around all mad about all these things that have happened, but then you're just going to be emitting this mad anger energy. You can sit around being mad at yourself. You can feel guilty, or you can feel ashamed, or whatever low vibration you're holding in because of some story that you're not able to let go of, that you've now given meaning to about yourself. You're the only one that's really suffering for the most part, because you're wallowing in this lower vibration energy because you don't want to forgive yourself, or you're being too hard on yourself, or you're not able to let it go for some reason. But if you can get on the other side of that and see, you know what, I signed up to have this experience of life. At the end, I'm going to be incredibly empathetic because I'm going to have experienced a wide range of things. So the compassion that you have on the other side of a lot of trauma is wonderful. And if you've never experienced anything upsetting, I don't know how you could have emotional depth, because you would have no way to contextualize what someone else's experience is like if you've really only lived this very sheltered, blissful time. And in order for those traumas to happen, you got to have, quote, bad guys to inflict them. So this is where it kind of gets to this new level of responsibility and taking ownership, is everybody in your life that who has, quote, harmed you or hurt you, you asked them to do it because you wanted to experience it. I had a really hard time with this in the beginning because I've been through some things that I couldn't imagine that I would want myself to experience. And I'm like, am I some sort of horrible, sadistic masochist who put myself in that situation on purpose? What's wrong with me? Why would I do that? And you have to really look at the depth that comes on the other side to know why you would want to experience something. And sometimes it's as simple as you just wanted to experience it. People watch horror movies because they like feeling scared. People watch really sad movies because they like the release of crying and releasing grief. And they can release that through a movie. And then when the movie's over, they kind of get up and walk away. So we often choose to experience these lower vibrations by watching movies that cover those topics. And to take that one step further, if you actually realize we're kind of living in this scripted reality, the difficult things we went through were for a purpose, and you needed someone to be a part of that because most of the traumatic experiences involve other people. So to get to the point where you can accept that, yes, that traumatic thing that happened actually was for my benefit because it gave me a lot of depth and compassion and understanding that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And I'm now not only going to forgive whoever else was involved, but I'm grateful because I, at a soul level, asked them to do it, and they honored that agreement. And it's kind of cool to get, and it's not that easy to fully embrace this. For me, saying this out loud is probably good for me. I have a difficult relationship with my father, and I did a meditation a couple of years ago where in this meditation, it kind of felt like a dream. I went outside of the game and I saw him, and he had told me that that he wasn't mad about anything, that he was just playing the part that I'd asked him to play. And he wanted me to know that everything was fine and that I wasn't supposed to take any of that personally. It was just what he had been asked to do because I needed to experience something, and he was a catalyst in that. And it was weird because it hadn't occurred to me to make that up. And so to experience that was actually quite liberating, especially when sort of that situation still feels very raw and upsetting. This part of me knocks on my shoulder and says, remember, there's still this possibility that it's all scripted and there is no conflict. It was just something that had to happen because it became a catalyst for other things for you in the future. So one way to, now here's the thing too, is like, I could be right about that or wrong about that. It's hard to prove. One option of being right about that gives me some comfort. Why not just believe it? Like, no one's harmed by me believing that anybody who's harmed you really didn't have an agenda to hurt you. It was just part of this desire to experience all of these emotions, the 31 flavors. So, all right, this got way longer than I thought. I will see you in the next one.